When his hand touched mine before everyone, the world stopped spinning. Blood ran between my fingers, hot and red, mixing with his, the blood of a king with that of a handmaiden. I should have fled when I first saw him. I should have looked away, kept my head down, remained invisible, but I did none of that. And now, with the entire court watching us in horror, with the ladies whispering my name like a curse, I knew there was no turning back. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10, and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. My name is Lysandra, though few pronounce it. For years, I was just the handmaiden, the one who moves in the shadows, who collects what others drop, who exists without being seen. I was born among ruins, a daughter of no one, raised out of pity or convenience. I never quite knew. What I do know is that they brought me to the palace when I was a child, too small to comprehend the chasm that separated my world from theirs. I learned early to be invisible, to walk without making a sound, to breathe without taking up space, to exist without being a bother. My feet knew every stone on the cold floor, every shadow of the endless corridors, every echo that reverberated through the towers when night fell. I was part of the architecture, as present and ignored as the marble columns that supported the ceiling. The palace was a world of cruel contrasts. On one side, the halls gleamed with gilded chandeliers, polished mirrors reflecting the artificial beauty of the ladies, the cloying scent of royal flowers that would sting my throat. On the other, the servants' quarters, cramped windowless rooms where the air was thick and the silence weighed like lead. I slept on a mattress too thin to ward off the cold of the floor, covered by a blanket that had been white a long time ago. The other handmaidens avoided me. They said I had the wrong kind of eyes, too bright for an orphan, too direct for someone who should keep her head bowed. Some whispered that I brought bad luck, that my presence attracted shadows. I heard them, but I didn't respond. I had learned that words are a luxury for those who have a voice, and I didn't. My routine was simple and cruel. I woke before dawn, when the sky was still violet and the stars hesitated to disappear. I washed my face with icy water that made my skin burn. I tied my hair, brown, too long, too unruly, into a tight bun that gave me a headache. I wore the same faded fabric I had worn for years, mended so many times that I no longer knew its original color. Then the work began, sweeping the immense corridors, polishing the mirrors until they perfectly reflected the beauty of others, never my own, collecting abandoned crystal goblets, the silk veils the ladies threw on the floor as if they had no value, carrying heavy buckets of water, going up and down stairs until my legs trembled, and always, always keeping my eyes down, because looking directly at a noble was a crime. Crossing a lady's path without bowing was an affront. Breathing too loudly in the presence of someone important was disrespect. I knew the rules, all of them, and I obeyed. But there was one rule no one needed to teach me, which I learned alone by observing the world through the cracks. Never, ever expect mercy. The ladies were the worst. They moved through the palace like perfumed swans, dressed in silks of impossible colors, deep blues, vibrant reds, golds that captured the candlelight. They laughed loudly, spoke in melodic tones, displayed jewels that glittered brighter than the stars. And they looked at me as if I were dirt. Lady Morgana was their leader. Tall, with hair as black as night, she had icy green eyes that seemed to pierce through people. Her beauty was sharp, dangerous, and her favorite pleasure was to humiliate me. I remember one specific afternoon, a few weeks before everything changed. I was in the main hall, polishing one of the enormous mirrors that covered the walls. My arms ached, my stomach rumbled with hunger. I hadn't eaten since the day before, but I kept working. It was that, or a beating. That's when Lady Morgana entered, followed by her friends. Her perfume arrived first, something floral and cloying that made me want to cough. But I held it in. I kept scrubbing the mirror, pretending not to exist. "Look," she said, her voice sweet as poison. "The creature is still here." The others laughed. I kept my eyes fixed on the glass. "Tell me, creature." Morgana approached, and I could feel the heat of her presence at my back. "Do you know your place?" I swallowed hard. My voice came out low, trembling. "Yes, my lady." "Then why do you dare breathe the same air as I?" Silence. I had no answer for that. There was no right answer. I felt something cold and wet trickle down the back of my neck. She had poured wine on my head. The red liquid ran through my hair, stained my already worn dress, dripped onto the clean floor I had just scrubbed. The ladies burst into laughter. "Now that's better," Morgana said, satisfied. "You're the right color." They walked away, still laughing, the sound of their heels echoing down the corridor. I stood there, motionless, feeling the wine burn my scalp, run down my back. My hands trembled. My throat burned with suppressed rage, with tears I refused to let fall, because crying was admitting weakness, and weakness was death. I cleaned the floor in silence. Afterward, I returned to my room, washed my hair with cold water until my fingers were numb, and continued my life as if nothing had happened. That was how I survived, swallowing humiliations, burying anger deep in my chest, existing without truly living, until he returned. The king, the alpha, the man who would change everything. The news arrived like thunder on a clear sky. The king was returning from war. After months away, leading battles in distant lands, he would finally return to the palace. And the entire castle went into a frenzy. I had never seen the king. He had left before I arrived at the palace, and all I knew about him came from the whispers of the other handmaidens, from conversations I overheard by chance while cleaning the halls. They said he was ruthless, that his eyes could extract confessions without a single word, that his presence made grown men tremble, that he never smiled, that he was just but cruel, that he protected his people but tolerated no weakness, and that above all, he was the Alpha, a title that went beyond king, something older, more primal, a leader who not only governed but dominated. I feared meeting him, but also, secretly, I was curious. The preparations for his arrival were intense. The halls were washed 3 times, the mirrors polished until they reflected every detail. The ladies chose their finest gowns, gold, silver, silks that whispered with every movement. The counselors rehearsed speeches, the guards aligned their armor. And me? I continued in my faded dress, my hair pinned up, my hands calloused. Because for me, nothing changed. Kings came and went, but handmaidens remained handmaidens. On the night scheduled for his return, the main hall was transformed. Hundreds of candles illuminated every corner, creating dancing shadows on the walls. The scent of royal flowers was so strong it made me dizzy. The entire court was present, nobles in their finest attire, ladies displaying jewels worth more than my entire life, guards positioned like statues. I was in the corner, near one of the columns, holding a tray with crystal goblets. My role was to serve in silence, to collect what was needed to exist without being seen, and then the doors opened. The sound ceased instantly. All the air seemed to be sucked from the hall, and he entered. The king. My heart stopped. He was immense. Not just in height, though he was tall, taller than any man I had ever seen, but in presence. It was as if space itself reorganized around him, as if gravity shifted when he moved. His steps were slow, deliberate, yet there was a predatory grace in them, like a wolf who knows it doesn't need to run to catch its prey. He wore black, complete black, without unnecessary ornaments, without gold or silver to prove his position. He didn't need to. Everything about him screamed power. His bearing, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his hands, large with long fingers, rested lightly on the hilt of the sword he carried at his belt. But it was his eyes that paralyzed me. Dark, penetrating. Eyes that seemed to see through people, that stripped away every lie, every mask. There was something in them that was more than human, something ancient, wild, dangerous. He crossed the hall in silence. No one dared to speak. The ladies lowered their eyes. The nobles bowed slightly. The guards stood even more rigid. And I should have looked away. I should have lowered my head, pretended not to exist as I always did. But I couldn't. I stood there, frozen, watching him, watching how the candle flames seemed to dance more intensely when he passed, how the air became denser, heavier, how my heart beat wildly, as if it recognized something in him that my mind did not yet comprehend, and it was in that moment, that eternal second, that it happened. The goblet slipped from my hands. The sound of crystal shattering against the marble was like a scream amidst the hallowed silence. 1,000 pieces of glass scattered across the floor, reflecting the candlelight like tiny fallen stars. The entire hall turned to me. I felt the weight of hundreds of gazes, the silent scandal, the collective disapproval. Lady Morgana smiled, a smile of victory, of cruel satisfaction. Finally, I would be publicly punished, but what made me tremble was not the gaze of the nobles. It was his. The king had stopped walking. He had turned, and he was looking directly at me. There was no anger in his eyes, no irritation, only an intensity that pierced me like a blade. The world shrank. The immense hall, the hundreds of people, everything disappeared. There was only us two, he, a force of nature in human form, and I, a handmaiden trembling in the corner of the hall. My breath caught, my heart pounded. Every inch of my skin tingled as if touched by electricity. And then he spoke. A single word, grave, serene, impossible to disobey. Come. My feet moved before my brain could process the command. It was as if my body no longer belonged to me, as if something older than my own will had taken control. Each step echoed on the cold marble, amplified by the deadly silence that had settled in the hall. I could hear everything, the rustle of the ladies' silks as they turned to watch me, the controlled breathing of the guards, the beating of my own heart, so loud I was sure everyone could hear it, and above all, the weight of his gaze, constant, unbroken, pulling me forward like an invisible rope tied to my chest. I dared not raise my eyes completely. I kept my head slightly bowed, as I had been taught. But my gaze betrayed my intentions. I saw him through my lashes. I saw his impeccably polished black leather boots, his long legs, his upright posture, the leather belt with dark metal details where his sword hung. His hands, my God, those hands, resting at his sides with a tranquility that was more menacing than any aggressive gesture. When I reached the center of the hall, a few steps from the throne where he stood, my legs almost gave way. The distance between us was too small. I could feel the heat emanating from him, perceive the scent of leather, metal, and something else, something wild, like a forest after rain, earth and wind. I stopped. I didn't know what to do. Bow? Kneel? Ask for forgiveness? The silence stretched, torturous, infinite. It was then that he moved. A single step toward me. My entire body bristled. I could have sworn the temperature in the hall had risen, that the air had become denser, harder to breathe. Look at me, he said. His voice was deep, profound, and carried a weight that made my bones vibrate. It was not a request. It was an absolute command, uttered by someone who was never, ever disobeyed. I raised my eyes slowly. First I saw his broad chest, covered by the black tunic. Then his strong neck, his defined jaw with a shadow of stubble that gave him an even more dangerous air. His lips, Firm, serious, and finally his eyes. My God, his eyes! They were dark as a moonless night, but there was a light in them, an intensity that made me want to recoil and approach at the same time. They studied me with a disturbing calm, as if he were reading every thought, every fear, every secret I kept deep in my soul. I felt my legs tremble. My throat went dry. I wanted to look away. Every instinct screamed for me to lower my head, to bow, to disappear, but I couldn't. It was as if those eyes held me in place, preventing me from doing anything but existing under his scrutiny. "What is your name?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. Nobles didn't ask handmaidens their names. They simply ordered, and we obeyed. Names were irrelevant. We were interchangeable. Lysandra, I managed to say, my voice coming out hoarse, too low. "My lord." There was an odd silence. Then the corner of his lips quirked up. It wasn't quite a smile, but there was something there, something that could have been amusement or approval. I couldn't tell. "Lysandra," he repeated, and my name in his voice sounded different, more real, as if for the first time in my life I truly existed. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, my king," I replied, and this time my voice came out a little firmer. "Then you know I tolerate no lies." My heart pounded. Lies. I hadn't lied. I hadn't said anything that could. "Look at your hands," he ordered. I obeyed, confused. My hands trembled slightly, still holding the empty tray. They were dirty with dust, my nails too short, my skin rough from constant work. A handmaiden's hands. Hands that had never known luxury. "These hands clean my halls," he said, his voice echoing through the silent space. "Polish my mirrors, carry the weight others. Deem unworthy, correct?" "Yes, my king." "Then why do you hide?" The question confused me. Hide? I wasn't hiding. I was there, in the center of the hall, exposed to everyone's gaze. Before I could answer, he did something that stopped my heart. He extended his hand, to me. The entire hall gasped, a collective sound of shock and horror. I heard Lady Morgana sigh indignantly. I heard the councillors murmur among themselves. I heard the entire world collapsing around that extended hand, because a king did not touch handmaidens, not publicly, not in a way that could be interpreted as anything other than a command. I looked at his hand. It was large, strong, with long fingers and calluses that showed he, too, knew the weight of weapons. His palm was turned upwards, open, waiting. "Give me your hand," he said, and there was no room for hesitation in his voice. My entire body trembled. I looked at him, searching for an explanation, a sign that this was some kind of test, a trap. But all I saw was that ruthless calm, that absolute certainty. Slowly, with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling, I placed my hand in his. The touch was like fire, not metaphorically. It was literal. A wave of heat surged up my arm, crossed my chest, spread throughout my entire body. Every nerve ending awakened, every cell screamed. It was as if my skin had been touched by something that was not entirely human. Something hotter, more intense, more alive. He closed his fingers around my hand, firm but not painful, secure, impossible to break free from, and then he pulled me closer. I almost stumbled. My face was inches from his chest. I could feel the heat emanating from his body through his tunic. I could hear his heartbeat, slow, controlled, in absolute contrast to my own, which raced like a bird trapped in a cage. "Before the court," he said, his voice echoing through the hall, loud enough for all to hear, "I acknowledge this woman." Absolute silence, not a breath. She serves this palace with loyalty. She carries the weight others reject, and for that— He paused, and I felt his eyes pierce me. "She deserves respect." Murmurs erupted, shocked, indignant, confused. A handmaiden, respect? This was unthinkable. This was silence, he roared. The word cut through the air like a whip. Everyone fell silent instantly. The power in his voice was absolute. There was no possible challenge. He released my hand, but only to reach for the belt where one of the guards held a short blade. He drew it from its sheath with a metallic sound that sent shivers down my spine. My heart almost stopped. Was he going to kill me? Here, in front of everyone. Why? I had done nothing but exist, but then he did something no one expected. He turned the blade and cut his own palm. Blood immediately welled up, vivid red, bright under the candlelight. It ran between his fingers, dripped onto the marble floor with a soft, almost musical sound. The hall descended into silent panic. Ladies covered their mouths, counselors exchanged alarmed glances, but no one dared to move. "Before blood," the king said, his voice grave and solemn, "no lie survives." And then he extended the blade to me. I looked at the weapon, then at him. My eyes must have been wide with panic because I saw something in his eyes, not exactly kindness, but a kind of understanding. "Cut your hand," he said, low, just for me, "and swear fealty to me. Here, now." I don't understand," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You don't need to understand," he replied. "Just trust." Trust. A king? A man who had just placed me at the center of a scandal that could cost me my life? But there was something in his eyes, something that wasn't cruel, something that for the first time in my life seemed to offer more than humiliation. I took the blade. My hand trembled so much I almost dropped it. I looked at my palm, dirty, calloused, marked by work, and then, before I could think better, before fear completely paralyzed me, I pressed the blade against my skin. The pain was sharp, clean. Blood immediately welled up, darker than his, mixing with the dirt on my hands. "Now," the king said, extending his wounded hand, "swear." I placed my hand in his. Our blood mixed, red on red, warm and slippery, uniting us in a way I didn't comprehend, but which I felt was irrevocable. "I swear," I managed to say, my voice coming out firmer than I expected, "fealty to you, my king." He closed his fingers around my hand, pressing the wound, making our blood mix even more. "And I," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "swear to protect her. Before the court and the gods, this woman is under my guardianship." The hall erupted, cries of indignation, frenzied whispers. Lady Morgana turned pale, her green eyes shining with pure hatred. The councillors stirred, clearly wanting to protest but lacking the courage to confront the king directly. But he ignored everything. He kept his eyes fixed on mine, our hands still joined by blood, and said, low enough for only me to hear, "You are mine now, Lysandra, and nothing and no one will change that." When he finally released my hand, I felt the immediate cold of absence. Blood still ran between my fingers, mixed with his, and there was something profoundly wrong and profoundly right about it at the same time. My entire arm tingled, as if the electricity of his touch still coursed through my veins. "Take her," the king ordered one of the guards without taking his eyes off me. "See to her wounds and provide her with proper chambers." Chambers? I was sure I had misheard. Handmaidens didn't have chambers. We had shared rooms, thin mattresses, windowless walls, but the guard was already at my side, gesturing for me to follow him. I looked at the king one last time, searching for... what? An explanation? A clue as to what had just happened? But he had already turned, walking toward the throne with the same dominant presence, leaving a trail of blood on the marble, as if he had just reorganized the entire world, and this was just another normal day. I followed the guard in silence, aware that every pair of eyes in the hall was fixed on me. I felt Lady Morgana's gaze like a knife in my back. I heard the whispers grow louder as I moved out of the king's range. A handmaiden? Has he lost his mind? This is an affront to the gods. What kind of sorcery did she use? Sorcery. as if I had the power to bewitch anyone, as if I wasn't just an orphan trying to survive another day. The guard led me through corridors I had never traversed. These were not the servants' paths, narrow, dark, undecorated. These were wide, illuminated, with tapestries on the walls and thick carpets on the floor. Each step I took left a bloodstain on the expensive fabric, and I winced at each mark, expecting to be punished for soiling something so valuable. We stopped before a dark wooden door, intricately carved with complex patterns. The guard opened it and gestured for me to enter. What I saw made me stop on the threshold, unable to move. It wasn't possible. This couldn't be for me. The room was immense, larger than all the handmaidens' shared quarters combined. There was a real bed, not a mattress on the floor, but a canopy bed with dark wood and crimson velvet curtains. There was a window, a real window, with thick glass that let in the moonlight, a table with a chair, a wooden chest, and, miracle of miracles, a basin of clean water on a stand. "The healer will come shortly to treat your hand," the guard said, his voice neutral, without judgment. "The king ordered that no one disturb you tonight." He left, closing the door behind him, and I stood there, alone, in the middle of a room that should not be mine, with blood drying on my hand, and the echo of the king's words reverberating in my head. "You are mine now." What did that mean? I staggered to the basin of water. My legs barely supported me. When I looked at my reflection on the water's surface, I almost didn't recognize myself. My face was pale, my eyes wide, my lips parted, as if I were still in shock. And I was. I carefully washed the blood from my hand, watching the clean water turn red. The cut wasn't deep, but it stung. It was a mark, a scar I would carry for the rest of my life, just as he would carry his. The door opened again, and a woman entered. She was older, with grey hair tied in a bun, wearing a simple but clean dress. She carried a basket with bandages and vials. "I am Helena, the healer," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Let me see your hand." I extended my hand, still trembling. She examined the cut with experienced fingers, cleaned it with something that stung terribly, and then applied a balm that immediately relieved the pain. "It will leave a scar," she commented, wrapping my hand with a clean bandage. "But it's not deep. It will heal well." "Thank you," I murmured. Helena looked at me for a long moment, her eyes studying my face. There was something in them, not judgment but curiosity, and perhaps concern. "The king never does anything without reason," she said softly. "But sometimes his reasons only become clear later. You will need strength for what is to come, child." "What is to come?" I asked, my voice weaker than I would have liked. She merely shook her head. "Rest. Tomorrow, the entire palace will have something to say about you, and nothing will be kind." With that, she left, leaving me alone again. I sat on the bed. My God, it was so soft, and looked at my bandaged hand. The blood had stopped flowing, but I could still feel his warmth, the warmth of the king's touch, the way his hand had enveloped mine, the weight of that oath. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the canopy above me, listening to the sounds of the palace, distant footsteps, whispers, the wind rattling the windows. And at some point, just before dawn, I could have sworn I heard footsteps stop outside my door. Heavy steps, deliberate. His. But no one knocked, no one entered, only the presence on the other side of the wood, like an invisible guardian. And when the sun finally rose, painting the room gold, I understood one thing. My life was over. The life of Lysandra, the invisible handmaiden, had died the moment he touched my hand. What remained now was something new, something I didn't understand, something dangerous and absolutely inevitable. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. News of what happened in the hall spread through the palace like wildfire. Every corridor I walked, every space I occupied was filled with stares, some curious, many furious, all judging. The other handmaidens avoided me completely now. When I entered a room, they left. When I passed, they whispered. No one spoke to me, except when absolutely necessary, and even then with icy voices, accusing looks. But it was the ladies who made my life hell. Lady Morgana led the attack with surgical precision. She didn't confront me directly. That would be stooping to my level. Instead, she orchestrated subtle humiliations, small cruelties that accumulated like paper cuts. One morning, I found my dress, the new one they had given me after the ceremony, torn to shreds and thrown in the garden mud. Another time, as I passed a group of ladies in the corridor, one of them accidentally stumbled, spilling wine on my clean clothes, and always the whispers. Witch, harlot, unworthy creature. Each word was a stone, and I carried them all. The worst part was that I didn't know what my role was now. I was no longer a handmaiden, not really, but I wasn't a noble either. I existed in a cruel limbo, belonging nowhere. The king did not summon me. He did not seek me out. In the first few days, I only saw him from afar. In council meetings, walking through the corridors with his guards, he never looked in my direction. It was as if I didn't exist, and that hurt more than it should, because I couldn't stop thinking about him, his touch, the warmth of his hand wrapping around mine, the promise he had made. You are mine now. But what did that mean? Possession? Protection? Or just another form of torture? It was on the 5th night after the ceremony that everything changed again. I was in my room. I still couldn't call it mine, without feeling like I was trespassing in a place that wasn't mine. When I heard a knock, it wasn't loud. It was firm, deliberate. I rose from the bed, my heart already pounding. No one visited me. No one had a reason to be there. I opened the door slowly, and there he was, the king, alone, without guards, wearing a simple black linen tunic, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it. And those eyes, those damned eyes, fixed on me with an intensity that made me forget how to breathe. "May I come in?" he asked, and there was something strange in his voice, something almost respectful. I stepped back from the door, unable to speak. He entered, and suddenly the immense room seemed small. His presence filled every corner, every shadow. I closed the door behind him, my hands trembling. "Are you well?" he asked, turning to face me. The question caught me off guard. No one ever asked if I was well. No one cared. Yes, my king," I managed to say. A lie. One word, direct, true. He approached, and I instinctively retreated until my back touched the wall. But he didn't stop advancing until he was a few inches from me, so close I could feel his warmth. The scent of leather and something else, something essentially him. "They are hurting you," he said. It wasn't a question, it was an affirmation. "The ladies, the nobles, even the servants." "It's expected," I murmured. "I am just mine," he cut in, his voice coming out hoarser, more intense. "You are mine, Lysandra, and no one touches what is mine." My heart stopped, then it pounded, my legs trembled. He raised his hand, the same one he had cut, which had mingled with mine, and touched my face. The touch was gentle, surprisingly soft, coming from such strong hands. "They don't understand," he said, his thumb tracing my cheek. "They don't see what I see." "What? What do you see?" I whispered. His eyes darkened further. "Strength," he said. "Survival, loyalty, everything that matters." And then he did something that utterly destroyed me. He leaned his head and rested his forehead against mine. The gesture was intimate, more intimate than any kiss could be. It was a connection, a recognition, a mutual surrender. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, his voice a hoarse whisper. "From the moment I saw you in that hall, something within me recognized you, as if I had been waiting for you my entire life." Tears stung my eyes. No one had ever spoken to me like that. No one had ever seen me as anything but an object, a burden, an inconvenience. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why me? I am nothing. I am nobody." He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. "You are everything," he said, and there was a brutal truth in those words. "And I will prove it to all of them. But first, I need you to trust me." "Trust?" I repeated, incredulous. "How can I trust when I don't understand anything that's happening?" "Because you have no choice," he said, without cruelty, just truth. "Because from the moment our blood mixed, our destinies intertwined. Because you can fight it all you want, but deep down, you feel the same as I do." And he was right. Damn him, he was right. I felt it. I felt the connection, the pull, the inevitable weight of something that was bigger than both of us. "Tomorrow," he said, finally pulling away, giving me room to breathe, "there will be another ceremony, and you will be by my side, not as a handmaiden, as an equal." "That's impossible," I whispered. "Impossible," he repeated, a small, dangerous smile curving his lips, "is my specialty." And with that he left, leaving me alone, trembling, my heart pounding, and the absolute certainty that my life would never be the same again. The morning arrived cold and grey. I woke to the sound of insistent knocking at the door, and for a moment thought it had all been a dream. But the dull ache in my bandaged hand reminded me it wasn't. Everything had happened. The king had been in my room. He had touched my face. He had said things that still made my heart race, just remembering them. I opened the door to find 3 women I had never seen before. They carried fabrics, boxes, and professional expressions that hid any judgment they might have. "The king ordered us to prepare you for the ceremony," said the eldest, entering without waiting for permission. "We need to start immediately." I had no time to protest. They guided me behind a screen and, with mechanical efficiency, stripped me of the simple dress I was wearing. I felt ashamed of my pale skin, the marks of labor on my hands and knees, the ribs that still protruded too much from years of insufficient meals. But they said nothing. They just worked. First, a bath in a tub they brought, filled with warm water perfumed with oils that made my head spin. They washed my hair with products that left it silky for the first time in my life. They scrubbed my skin until it glowed. Then the dress. It was dark red, almost wine-colored. The fabric was finer and more expensive than anything I'd ever touched. It fell from my shoulders in a way that made me feel both naked and covered at the same time. The cut was modest enough not to be scandalous, but revealing enough to declare a message. I was no longer a handmaiden. "The king chose the color," one of the women commented as she adjusted the back. "Red like sworn blood." Blood! It always came back to blood. They brushed my hair, leaving it loose, another deliberate gesture. Handmaidens wore their hair up, ladies wore elaborate arrangements. But leaving it loose, simple and natural, was a statement in itself. When they finally showed me a mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman reflected was not the invisible handmaiden. It was someone new, someone who existed, someone who took up space, and it terrified me. "It's time," the eldest woman said. They guided me through the corridors. This time, no one whispered. People simply stopped and stared, fixedly, openly, some with curiosity, others with disdain, but everyone looked. I was no longer invisible, and that was more terrifying than any humiliation I had ever suffered. We arrived at the main hall. The doors were open, and inside I could see the entire court gathered. Hundreds of people, nobles in their finest clothes. Ladies in their elaborate dresses, guards lined the walls, and in the center of it all, on the raised throne, him, the king. Our eyes met across the distance, and something in his chest stirred. I saw it clearly. It wasn't a smile. It was something deeper: recognition, satisfaction, possession. "Enter," one of the guards said. I took the first step, and the hall fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of each gaze, each judgment, each cruel thought. But I kept my head held high. If I was going to be destroyed, I would stand tall. I walked to the center of the hall, the same spot where I had dropped the goblet, the same spot where our blood had mingled. And I stopped. The king rose from the throne. The movement was fluid, natural, but the effect was devastating. The entire room seemed to lean in his direction. He commanded attention effortlessly, dominating the space just by existing. "Members of the court," his voice echoed through the hall, grave and absolute. "Today we continue what we began days ago. An oath was sworn, blood was shed, and now, before all of you, I reaffirm my word." He descended the throne steps, each stride reverberating on the marble. He approached me with that predatory grace that made my heart beat faster. He stopped inches away, so close I could feel his warmth, see every detail of his face, his strong jaw, his firm lips, his eyes that pierced me. "Lysandra," he said, and my name in his voice still sounded like a claim. "From this moment on, you are no longer a handmaiden. You are my protected one, my chosen one, and anyone who tries to harm you will answer directly to me." The hall erupted in murmurs, contained protests, shock. "My king!" a voice rose above the others. It was one of the councillors, an old man with a grey beard and a severe expression. "This is unthinkable. A handmaiden cannot simply—" "She is no longer a handmaiden," the king cut in, his voice cold as steel. "Or do you question my authority?" Immediate silence. The councillor paled and bowed. "No, my king." "Good." The king turned to me again. "Extend your hand." I obeyed, extending my bandaged hand. He took it with surprising gentleness, his fingers enveloping mine. Then, slowly, he began to remove the bandage. The scar was visible now, a red line crossing my palm. He raised his own hand, showing the identical scar. "Our blood mingled," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "This binds us, an ancient pact, stronger than any title, any social position, and I honor my pacts." He laced his fingers through mine, pressing the scars against each other. The contact was electric. Every nerve in my body awakened. My breath caught. "You will stay by my side," he said, "just for me. Today and always. Do you understand?" "Yes," I whispered. "Say you." "Or mine." My heart stopped. The words were a command and a request at the same time. "I am yours," I said, and it sounded like a confession, a surrender, a truth. Something wild gleamed in his eyes. And then, in front of the entire court, he did the unthinkable. He bent down and kissed my hand, not the palm where the scar was, but my fingers, one by one, slowly, deliberately, intimately. The hall froze. Lady Morgana let out a sound of indignation. The other ladies looked about to faint. The nobles exchanged shocked glances, but he didn't care. He continued kissing my hand, his lips warm against my skin, until I was trembling, until I was sure my legs would give way. "Now," he said, finally pulling away, "let's see who dares disrespect what is mine." He guided me to a position beside the throne. Not seated on it, that would be going too far, but standing to his right in a position of honor normally reserved only for the queen. But there was no queen. There had never been one. He ruled alone, without a consort, without heirs. And now I was there, occupying a space no one else had. The ceremony continued, but I barely registered it. I was too aware of his presence beside me, his warmth, the way every now and then his fingers brushed mine, brief, almost imperceptible, but enough to remind me that he knew exactly where I was, all the time. When it finally ended and people began to disperse, I felt Morgana's gaze. I turned my head and found her staring at me with pure hatred. She approached, her friends flanking her like soldiers. "Do you think you've won anything?" she hissed, low enough for the king not to hear. "Do you think a pretty dress and a scar make you our equal?" "I never wanted to be your equal," I replied, surprising myself with my own audacity. Her green eyes flared. "You are an abomination," she spat, "a stain on this palace. And sooner or later, the king will tire of you. And when that happens, there will be nowhere for you to hide." "Be careful," the king's voice came from behind her, grave and dangerous. "With your words, Lady Morgana." She turned, pale. He was right there, having heard everything. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes, something wild, menacing. "I tolerate no threats against what is mine," he said, each word heavy. "That applies to everyone, including you." Morgana bowed quickly, but before she walked away, she cast me one last look, a silent promise. This wasn't over. When we were alone in the empty hall, the king turned to me. "She will try to hurt you," he said without preamble. "She and others like her. They cannot bear that you are where you are." "Why?" I asked, finally voicing the question that consumed me. "Why me? What do you gain from this? Why are you doing all this?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he raised his hand and touched my face, his thumb tracing my cheek with a gentleness that contrasted with all the raw power he emanated. "Because you are strong," he said. "Because you survived where others would have broken. Because when I look at you, I see something real. Not masks, not games, only truth. And truth, Lysandra, is the most valuable thing in this world of lies." And before I could answer, before I could process those words, he leaned in and pressed his lips against my forehead. It was a chaste kiss, almost reverent, but it burned more than any fire. "Sleep well tonight," he murmured against my skin, "because tomorrow the real war begins." The war the king had predicted arrived faster than I expected, and it came from all directions at once. I woke the next morning with the feeling of being watched. I got out of bed and went to the window, looking down at the garden. Groups of ladies talked in closed circles, their heads tilted, furtive glances cast toward my window. Even from afar, I could feel the animosity. When I went down for breakfast, something I was now required to do with the court, no longer in the servants' quarters, the silence that greeted me was glacial. All conversation stopped. All eyes turned. And then, deliberately, the nobles returned to their conversations, completely excluding me. It was as if I didn't exist, worse, as if I existed only as an insult to their presence. I sat at an empty table, my hands trembling as I picked up a piece of bread. I couldn't swallow. The food seemed to turn to ashes in my mouth, but I forced myself to eat, forced myself to keep my head held high. "Poor thing," I heard one of the ladies say, loud enough for me to hear. "She really thinks she belongs here." "The king will tire of her soon," another replied. "It's always like this. He has his whims." Whims. That's what I was. Temporary entertainment. I finished the meal in silence and returned to my room. But when I opened the door, I froze. The room was destroyed. The mattress had been torn, goose feathers scattered everywhere. The curtains were ripped down. My few belongings, so few, had been thrown on the floor, trampled. And on the mirror, written with something red that looked like blood, a single word, harlot. My stomach churned, my legs trembled. But before I could fully process it, I heard footsteps behind me. It was the king. He stopped at the threshold, his eyes sweeping the destroyed room. His expression hadn't changed. It remained calm, controlled. But something in the air shifted. It became heavier, more dangerous. I could have sworn the temperature had dropped. "Who?" he said, his voice low, deadly. "Did this?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice trembling. He entered the room, his eyes fixed on the message in D, the mirror. He ran his finger over the word, the red liquid staining his skin. He sniffed. His eyes darkened. "Animal blood," he said. "They planned this. They knew exactly what they were doing." He turned to me, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw real anger in his eyes. Not anger at me, anger for me. "This ends now," he said. "How?" I asked, feeling tears sting my eyes but refusing to let them fall. "They hate me, all of them. No matter what you do, I will always be the handmaiden who dared to rise above her place." He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands holding my face, forcing me to look at him. "You didn't rise," he said, intense. "I put you where you belong, and if they cannot see your worth, then they are blind, and I do not need blind men in my court. You can't just— I can do whatever I wish," he cut in. "I am the king, and it is time to remind them of that." He released me and left the room with determined strides. I followed him, my heart pounding, not knowing what he was about to do, but fearing the intensity of his movements. He went straight to the main hall, where the nobles and ladies were gathered for the morning council meeting. When he entered, everyone rose, bowing respectfully. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice echoing through the space. Everyone obeyed immediately. "It has come to my attention," he began, walking slowly down the center of the hall, "that some of you believe you are above my orders." Tense silence. Glances were exchanged. "When I make an oath," he continued, "I honor it. When I make a declaration, it is not a suggestion. It is law. And when I protect someone, that protection is absolute." He stopped, his eyes sweeping the room, fixing on each face. "Lysandra is under my guardianship," he said, and my name in his voice made everyone shudder. "Any disrespect toward her is disrespect toward me. Any attack on her is treason against the crown." Lady Morgana was pale, but she kept her chin held high, defiant. "And treason," the king continued, his voice growing colder, "is punished with exile or death." The hall erupted in shocked whispers. "You have until sunset today," he said, "to decide if you accept my laws or if you prefer to seek another court. But know this, if you choose to stay and continue with this campaign of cruelty, there will be no second chance. There will be no mercy." He turned and walked back to where I stood, at the entrance of the hall. He took my hand and raised it, showing the joined scars. "This woman is mine," he declared, "and I protect what is mine. Always." With that, he guided me out of the hall, leaving the court in absolute shock. We walked in silence through corridors until we reached a place I had never seen before. The king's private gardens. It was an enclosed space, surrounded by high walls with ancient trees and a small lake. Peaceful, isolated. "Why do you do this?" I finally asked, my voice breaking. "Why do you risk so much for me?" He pulled me close, his hands holding my arms, forcing me to face him. "Because I am tired," he said, and there was a vulnerability in his voice I had never heard before. "Tired of living surrounded by lies, of political games, of people who serve me out of fear, not loyalty. And then you appeared." He let out a humorless laugh. "A handmaiden, the last person who should have caught my attention. But something about you—" He shook his head. "I saw strength. I saw survival. I saw truth. And I cannot let that go." "But this is destroying your court," I argued. "They will never accept it. I am not worth this." His eyes flared. "You are worth everything," he said, and the intensity in his words hit me like a punch. "And if they cannot see that, then they are not worthy of being here. You can't just dismantle your court for my sake." "I can," he said, "and I will, if necessary, because you need to understand something, Lysandra. I did not make that blood oath as an empty gesture. It was real. It meant something. It meant everything." He moved closer, his forehead resting against mine again, that intimate gesture that made my world stop. "You are mine," he whispered, "not just because I decided, but because something in me recognized something in you. As if our souls had been searching for each other for 1,000 lifetimes. Tears finally escaped my eyes. Not from sadness, but from something I couldn't name. Relief, terror, impossible happiness. "I am afraid," I confessed. "Afraid that this is temporary. That you will wake up one day and realize you made a mistake." "Never," he said, so convinced there was no room for doubt. "You are the most right thing I have ever done." And then he kissed me. It wasn't like the kiss on my hand. It wasn't chaste or reverent. It was hunger. It was desperation. It was years of loneliness being shattered in a single moment. His lips were warm, firm, demanding. He kissed me, as if trying to prove something, to me, to him, to the entire universe, and I returned it. My God, I returned it. I clung to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that spun too fast, and I surrendered completely. When we finally separated, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against mine again. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I protect what is mine, always." But as I stood there in his arms, feeling safer than ever in my life, a part of me knew the storm was just beginning, and it would be devastating. The king fulfilled his promise absolutely and mercilessly. The next day, 3 noble families were exiled from the palace. Not for confessing the attack on my room, no one confessed, but because he decided their presences were no longer necessary. These were political decisions wrapped in personal justice. The message was clear: defy me and pay the price. The palace grew quieter after that. The ladies walked carefully, measuring every word, every glance. The nobles kept a respectful distance, but the hatred hadn't disappeared. It had merely hidden, and hidden things are always more dangerous. 2 days after the exiles, the king announced a banquet, a grand event to celebrate the unity of the court, his words laden with irony. Everyone knew the real purpose. It was a test, a challenge. He was forcing the court to publicly accept me, or to expose themselves by defying him. The night of the banquet arrived, shrouded in palpable tension. I was prepared again by the same silent women. This time, the dress was golden, the color of power, the color of royalty. The fabric shimmered like liquid metal, embracing my body in a way that made me feel both powerful and exposed. My hair was arranged in elaborate braids, interwoven with real gold threads. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman reflected. She looked strong. She looked like she belonged in that world. But inside, I was still the terrified handmaiden, waiting for everything to collapse. The banquet would be in the main hall, which had been transformed, long tables lined up, covered with white linen cloths. Hundreds of candles created a golden, flickering light. The aroma of roasted meats, fresh bread and expensive wine permeated the air. It was opulence in its most extravagant form. I entered beside the king. He was impeccable in a black tunic embroidered with silver threads, the simple yet imposing crown resting on his dark hair. When our eyes met, he offered his arm. I accepted, and together we walked to the main table, elevated on a platform. Everyone stood when we entered. They bowed, they murmured the appropriate greetings. But I felt the stares, some curious, others hostile, all evaluating. The king guided me to the seat at his right, the position of honor, the position that would normally be the queen's. Lady Morgana was seated further down, her emerald green dress making her eyes seem colder, more calculating. She watched me with the patience of a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. The banquet began. Dishes were served, succulent meats, roasted vegetables, warm breads, exotic fruits. Wine flowed freely. Conversations erupted, cautious at first, then more relaxed as the alcohol loosened tongues. I barely touched the food. My stomach was too tight. The king beside me noticed. Every now and then, his hand found mine under the table. A brief, comforting touch, a silent reminder, you are not alone. When the main courses were cleared and dessert was served, the king stood. The hall immediately fell silent. I want to propose a toast, he said, his voice echoing through the space. To loyalty, to truth, and to those who have the courage to defy expectations. He raised his goblet, looking directly at me. To Lysandra, he said, the strongest woman I have ever known. There was a moment of hesitation. Then, one by one, the nobles raised their goblets, some sincerely, others with visible reluctance, but all raised them, except for one person. Lady Morgana remained seated, her goblet untouched on the table. The gesture was a deliberate challenge, silent but unmistakable. The king noticed. How could he not? His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He simply drank from his goblet, his eyes fixed on Morgana with a silent promise. The music began, musicians playing soft melodies in the corner of the hall. Some couples rose to dance. The king turned to me, extending his hand. Dance with me, he said. It was not a request. I accepted his hand, and he guided me to the center of the hall. His hand found my waist, firm and warm. The other intertwined his fingers with mine, and we began to move. I had never danced before, not like that. But he guided me with ease, his movements precise, patient, and slowly I let myself go. You look beautiful, he murmured, low enough for only me to hear. I don't belong here, I replied, equally low. You belong where I am, he said, and I am here. We twirled, the music enveloping us, and for a moment, just a moment, I managed to forget the stares, the judgments, the danger. There was only him and me, moving as one. That's when I heard the scream, a sharp sound of pain. The music stopped abruptly. Everyone turned. The handmaidens was on the floor, convulsing. Foam came from her mouth. Her body writhed in horrific spasms. Poison! Someone shouted. Chaos erupted. People stood up, shouting, pushing. Guards rushed to the fallen handmaiden. The king pushed me behind him, instinctively protective, his eyes sweeping the room with deadly intensity. Helena, the healer, ran over. She knelt beside the handmaiden, examined her quickly. Shadow oil, she said, her voice loud and clear. Highly poisonous. She won't survive. Where did it come from? The king demanded. Helena picked something up from the floor, a broken goblet. She sniffed the remaining contents. This goblet, she said, it was poisoned. My blood froze. I looked at the main table, at my place, and I saw. The goblet that had been beside my plate was gone. The handmaiden had probably picked it up to clean and drank from it. The poison was meant for me. The king realized it at the same moment. I saw understanding, then fury cross his face. He turned slowly, his eyes sweeping the room, searching for the culprit. Someone, he said, his voice low, dangerous, attempted to assassinate my protected one, and in the process killed an innocent handmaiden. Deadly silence. Whoever did this, he continued, has until dawn to present themselves. Otherwise, I will begin investigating every person in this hall. And when I find out, because I will find out, the punishment will be exemplary. He pulled me close, his hand firm on my back. Guards, he ordered, seal the palace. No one enters or leaves until the culprit is found. I was escorted back to my room, now with guards positioned outside. The king came with me, his presence filling the space, his anger palpable. "They tried to kill you," he said, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "They tried to take you from me." "This was inevitable," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "You had to know we would get here." He stopped, turning to face me. "I will find who did this," he promised, "and I will destroy them." "What if it's someone important?" I asked. "Someone powerful?" "I don't care," he said, absolute. "Power means nothing in the face of treason." He approached, his hands holding my face with a gentleness that contrasted with the violence in his words. "You are safe," he said. "I promise nothing will harm you. Nothing." But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something that frightened me. I saw a man willing to burn the entire world to protect me. And that was both comforting and terrifying. Because when you become the center of someone's world like that, when you become the only thing that matters, what happens when you lose it? And for the first time I wondered, what would have to be sacrificed to keep me safe? How much blood would be shed in my name? Dawn broke, and no one had come forward. The poisoned handmaiden died during the night, her body being prepared for burial, while the entire palace remained under siege. Guards patrolled every corridor. No one could leave their chambers without express permission. The tension was so dense it seemed to make breathing difficult. I was summoned to the throne room at noon. When I arrived, I found the entire court gathered, nobles, ladies, councillors, all with expressions ranging from fear to indignation. In the center, the king sat on the throne, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp as blades. "Lysandra," he said when he saw me, "come." I walked to him under the weight of hundreds of stares. I stopped at the foot of the throne, but he gestured for me to ascend. I hesitated. To ascend the steps, to stand beside him there, it was too powerful a symbol. "Now," he said, and there was no room for disobedience in his voice. I ascended. I stood beside him, my hand immediately captured by his. He laced our fingers together, leaving the joined scars visible to all. "An attempt was made on her life," he began, "and an innocent handmaiden paid the price. This is unacceptable. This is treason." He stood still holding my hand and descended the steps. He walked slowly through the hall, his eyes fixing on each face. "I offered the chance for confession," he continued. "No one came forward. So we investigated, and we discovered interesting things." He stopped before Lady Morgana. She held her head high, but I saw her pulse quicken. Paleness spread across her face. "Lady Morgana," the king said, his voice dangerously calm, "you served my court for years. Your family has ancient ties to the crown. For this, I will give you one chance, a single chance." Silence. "Did you attempt to poison Lysandra?" "No, my king," she replied, but there was an instability in her voice. "A lie," he said simply. "We found the vial of poison in your chambers, hidden, but not well enough." The hall erupted in murmurs. Morgana paled further. That was planted," she protested. "Someone is trying to frame me." "We also found payments," the king continued, relentless. "You paid one of the kitchen handmaidens to add the poison to the goblet. The handmaiden confessed. She is in the dungeons now." Morgana staggered. Her friends moved away from her, quickly distancing themselves. "Why?" I asked, my voice coming out before I could control myself. "Why try to kill me?" She turned to me, and for the first time I saw the mask drop. I saw pure, undisguised hatred. "Because you don't deserve to be here," she screamed. "You are nothing, less than nothing, a handmaiden, a creature without a name, without family, without value. And somehow you managed to captivate the king, make him believe you are worth something." "Silence," the king roared. But Morgana was beyond reason. "He is mine by right," she continued, tears of rage streaming. "My family negotiated my marriage to him for years. I should be queen. And then you appear with your pathetic eyes and your weakness, and he just chooses you? Ah, understanding hit me like a lightning bolt. It wasn't just class hatred. It was the hatred of a woman who had seen her future ripped away by someone she considered inferior. The king stepped forward, placing himself between me and Morgana. "Your mistake," he said, each word heavy, "was to assume you had any right over me, that agreements made by families mattered more than my own choice. You never knew me, Morgana, never tried. You saw only a crown, a title, power. But Lysandra," he turned to look at me. "She saw me. The man, not the king. And that is worth more than any political agreement." He turned his attention back to Morgana. "For attempting to assassinate my protected one, for taking the life of an innocent handmaiden, and for conspiring against the crown, I condemn you to permanent exile. You have until sunset to leave this palace. If you are still here after that, you will be imprisoned." "You cannot." "I can," he cut in. "I am the king, and my word is law." Guards approached, ready to escort her away. But before she went, she gave me one last look. "You will regret this," she hissed. "When he tires of you, when you realize you're just a temporary plaything, you will regret having accepted this farce." "Leave," the king ordered. She was led away, her cries of protest echoing down the corridors until they disappeared. The hall was in shock. No one dared to speak. The king turned to the court. "Let this serve as a warning," he said. "Lysandra is under my protection. Any attack on her is an attack on me, and I will tolerate no more betrayals. Am I clear?" A chorus of "Yes, my king" filled the hall. "Good, you are dismissed." People quickly dispersed, eager to escape the tension. When we were relatively alone, the king finally released me and ran his hands over his face, exhausted. "I knew it would come to this," he said, his voice sounding tired. "I knew that choosing you, protecting you, would cause storms. But I didn't care, and I don't care now." "She wasn't entirely wrong," I said softly. "I don't belong in this world, not really. And you are sacrificing so much." "Stop," he cut in, turning to face me. "Stop doubting yourself. Stop believing you don't deserve to be here." "But I don't deserve it," I exploded, finally letting the frustration out. "You are destroying your court for my sake, exiling families, causing divisions, risking your own position, and for what? For a handmaiden you don't even truly know." "I know you," he said, firm. "I know your strength, your resilience, your kindness, even after all you've suffered. I know the way you try to make yourself small so others can feel big, the way you carry pain in silence. And I know," he approached, his hands holding my face, "the way you look at me when you think I'm not looking, as if I were something valuable, something worth protecting." Tears stung my eyes. "I am afraid," I confessed. "Afraid that this will end, that you will realize you made a mistake." "Look at me," he ordered. I obeyed, forcing myself to meet his eyes. "You are the best decision I have ever made," he said, "and I will not give up on you. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." He leaned in, resting his forehead against mine. "You need to choose to trust," he whispered. "Trust me. Trust what we have, because I have already chosen. I chose you, and that choice is forever." "How can you be so sure?" I asked. "Because," he said, "when I look at you, I see my future. I see a queen, not by political agreements or lineage, but by strength of character, by heart, by the things that truly matter." My legs almost gave way. "Queen." "Are you serious?" I whispered. "Completely," he replied. "But first, you need to believe you deserve it. You need to stop seeing yourself as the invisible handmaiden and start seeing yourself as I see you." "And how do you see me?" He smiled, a small, genuine smile that completely transformed his face. "As the woman who saved my heart from turning to stone," he said, as the only real person in a world of masks, as mine. And then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle, it was desperate, urgent, as if he were trying to prove something that words couldn't, and I returned it with the same intensity, letting all my doubts, all my fears, dissolve in that kiss. When we separated, both breathing heavily, he kept his face close to mine. "Marry me," he said. My heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, "not for politics, not for obligation, but because I choose you, and I want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving that you were the best choice I ever made." Words failed. "This will cause another storm." "Let it," he said. "We will face it together, as we have faced everything until now." I looked at that man, the king, the alpha, the most powerful force I knew, and saw vulnerability. I saw hope. I saw love. "Yes," I said, my voice breaking, "yes, I will marry you." The happiness that exploded in his eyes was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. He lifted me, spinning me in the air, and laughed, a free, genuine sound I had never heard from him. "You just made the most dangerous man in the kingdom the happiest one too," he said, setting me back down but not letting go. "I think I can live with that," I replied, smiling through tears. And for the first time since it all began, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I truly belonged there. Not because someone gave me permission, not because I fit into some mold, but because someone chose me. And I chose back. The months that followed were a whirlwind. The engagement was announced, causing exactly the storm I expected. Some nobles left in protest. Others stayed, curious to see how everything would unfold. New families arrived, drawn by the promise of a transforming court. I was taught protocols, etiquette, politics. I learned to dance properly, to speak in public, to negotiate with diplomats. But the king always reminded me, learn the rules, but don't let them change who you are. And they didn't. I still walked through the servants' corridors, talked with the people who were once my equals. I still remembered where I came from, and that somehow made me a different kind of queen. On our wedding night, before a renewed court and under the gaze of hundreds of people, I said my vows. And when the king, my husband, slipped the ring onto my finger, I saw our journey reflected in the metal. From a speck of dust to the side of the throne, from invisibility to the center of everything, from handmaiden to queen, but more importantly, from alone to loved, when we kissed, sealing our vows, the entire hall applauded. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel judged. I felt celebrated. That night, in our chambers, ours, no longer just mine or his, he held my hand, tracing the scar that united us. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" I asked. "For trusting me," he said. "For believing, for saving me from a life without color, without warmth, without love." "You saved me first," I said. "You saw me when everyone ignored me. You chose me when no one else would. Then we saved each other," he said, smiling. "What a perfect combination." And so, under the starry night sky, we began our life together. Not as king and handmaiden, not as superior and inferior, but as equals, as partners, as two souls who, against all odds, found in each other what they had been searching for their entire lives: truth, loyalty, and absolute love. If you followed our journey this far, if you felt every emotion, every fear, every victory alongside Lysandra and her king, show your appreciation with a like. Share this story with someone who believes in the power of love that defies expectations. And subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and challenge the soul, because we all deserve to be seen, chosen, and loved exactly as we are.